Welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. This week we wind up our deep dive into 1975 with a look at movies, television, and the Beach Boys in the months of October, November, and December. We'll also look at the record charts at year end. That still leaves us a lot to get to. Let's get started with a look at some notable new movie releases. Released on October 3rd is the Western, The Master Gunfighter. Tom Laughlin, Billy Jack, and the man behind Billy Jack, is back with a new film. It co-stars Superfly Ron O'Neal and will be number one at the box office the week of October 8th. Released on October 8th, Charles Bronson and James Coburn in the Depression-era drama Hard Times. It'll be number one the week of October 15th. Also released that day, another film set in the 30s, Hearts of the West. This one is a comedy set in the world of Hollywood westerns, starring Jeff Bridges, Blythe Danner, and Andy Griffith. Also on October 8th, following up on her acclaimed film debut in 1972's Lady Sings the Blues, Diana Ross reunites with Billy D. Williams for the romantic comedy Mahogany. On October 9th, Ken Russell, whose film version of Tommy had been released earlier in the year, is back with a new musical film, Listomania, this one once again starring Roger Daltrey. It's based very, very loosely on the life of 19th century composer Franz Liszt. And like Tommy, it's way over the top. The soundtrack album features the music of Liszt and Wagner, produced and arranged by Rick Wakeman, with vocal contributions from Daltrey. Rick Wakeman also appears in the film as the Norse god Thor. Ringo Starr appears as the Pope. Opening on October 11th is Let's Do It Again. Sidney Poitier and Bill Cosby, stars of 1974's Uptown Saturday Night, reunite for another caper comedy, this time featuring comedy sensation Jimmy Walker, JJ from the hit TV series Good Times. It'll be number one at the box office for 4 weeks, from November 26th to December 24th. On November 6th comes George Burns and Walter Matthau in Neil Simon's The Sunshine Boys. Though he's a legendary radio and television comic, mostly as straight man to his wife Gracie Allen, George Burns is not known as an actor. Nevertheless, he'll win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor of 1975 for this film. The film will top the box office for 2 weeks, beginning January 28, 1976. Opening on November 19th is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Jack Nicholson in an intense drama based on the book by Ken Kesey. It'll become the second biggest movie of 1975 after Jaws. It'll be number one at the box office for 6 weeks, from February 11th, 1976 to March 24th, 1976, and again for 2 weeks from March 31st to April 14th, around Oscar time. At the Academy Awards ceremony held on March 29th, it'll win Best Picture, Best Director for Milos Forman, Best Actor for Jack Nicholson, and Best Actress for Louise Fletcher. On November 21st comes The Other Side of the Mountain, a dramatic romance based on the life of skiing champion Jill Kinmont and starring Marilyn Hassett and Beau Bridges. Released on December 14th is The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother, a musical comedy written and directed by and starring Gene Wilder. On December 17th comes Sean Connery and Michael Caine in John Huston's adventure drama The Man Who Would Be King, based on the story by Rudyard Kipling. A day later, on December 18th, comes another historic drama, Barry Lyndon, directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Ryan O'Neal. Despite its epic scope and the fact that Kubrick famously insisted on finding cameras and film that could render images by candlelight, the reaction is generally respectful but unenthusiastic. On December 19th comes Sam Peckinpah's action thriller, The Killer Elite, starring James Caan and Robert Duvall. It'll be number one at the box office the week of December 24th. Doing good business with families over the holidays is a December 20th re-release of Walt Disney's 1937 animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Also for families is the live-action Adventures of the Wilderness Family, released on December 25th. It'll be number one at the box office the week of January 14th. Also released on December 25th is Lucky Lady, a 30s-era comic drama starring Gene Hackman, Liza Minnelli, and Burt Reynolds. Also on December 25th, The Hindenburg, a disaster movie for the holidays, this time, of course, based on a true story, but with an added subplot involving conspiracy and sabotage. It stars George C. Scott and is directed by Robert Wise. There's quite a bit of action on television in the fourth quarter, particularly when it comes to late night. On October 3rd, ABC's Wide World of Entertainment, their late-night variety show, airs a Monty Python special. U.S. fans who are still seeing the series for the first time as it continues to air on PBS can't figure out why John Cleese is absent, why the rest have noticeably longer hair, and moreover, why the show is so unremittingly terrible. Much later, we'll learn that ABC had access to the show's final season, which hadn't yet aired in the US. ABC had re-edited those episodes trying to turn them into a movie and completely gutted the humor. Monty Python will sue to prevent it happening again. On October 11th, NBC's Saturday Night premieres at 11:30 p.m. in the slot held by Johnny Carson's Tonight Show Monday through Friday. The first show is hosted by hip comedian George Carlin, with musical guests Billy Preston and Janice Ian, guest comedians Valerie Bromfield and Andy Kaufman, and a cameo appearance by Paul Simon. Regular features in the first season also include a film by Albert Brooks and a segment with the Muppets. Looking at it now, it seems crazily overstuffed, like they were desperate that not 2 minutes should go by without something novel on the screen. On the night, I happened to be up and caught it while changing channels. My impression was that it was much hipper and more sophisticated than anything else on TV, like some underground New York humor and culture magazine brought to the screen. I don't think I ever missed an episode until the early 80s. Of course, I wasn't alone in my assessment. It'll become the most influential American television program for the rest of the decade and one of the longest-running television series of all time. 1 week later, on October 18th, the second episode of NBC's Saturday Night is hosted by Paul Simon. The show features a reunion with Art Garfunkel. Together, they perform The Boxer, Scarborough Fair, and the new Simon & Garfunkel single, My Little Town. 2 weeks after that, on November 8th, in a show hosted by Candice Bergen, cast member Chevy Chase impersonates President Ford for the first time. Chase makes zero effort to look or sound like Ford, and plays him as dim-witted and extremely clumsy. Surprising now, the Ford administration will seem unduly distressed by the portrayal and struggle over the next year with how to respond, mainly trying to be seen as good sports about it. Turning to primetime, on Tuesday, December 16th, comes an early mid-season replacement, One Day at a Time, on CBS. It stars Bonnie Franklin as divorced Anne Romano, raising her 2 teenage daughters, Julie, played by Mackenzie Phillips, and Barbara, played by Valerie Bertinelli. Richard Mazer is Anne's boyfriend, David. Pat Harrington provides comedy as the building superintendent, Dwayne Schneider. It'll be a hit, running with a number of cast and format changes until 1984. On December 15th and December 22nd, in a 2-part episode, Archie and Edith Bunker become grandparents with the birth of Mike and Gloria's son Joey on All in the Family. At the beginning of the season, to prepare for Joey's arrival, Gloria and Mike, the Bunkers' daughter and son-in-law, had moved next door into the house occupied by the Jeffersons before they moved on up to the East Side. The Beach Boys continue touring extensively in North America in the fourth quarter, playing to large, enthusiastic crowds. This is their 1975 tour book. I wasn't quite concert going back in 1975. I picked this up a few years ago. Thought you might like to have a look at it. As you can see, it's got a very contemporary design. And inside, you've got lots of black and white photos of the band, all of pretty recent vintage, either together or individually. It looks like most of them were shot at Caribou Ranch. Al, once again, seems to be sort of odd man out on the photos. Looks like most of his were done at Big Sur. The rest of them mainly seem to be at the Caribou Ranch. A lot of really cool pictures there. Even Brian's at the Caribou Ranch. I guess he was there in the fall of '74 for those sessions. There's only one bit of text, and it happens to be on the one page that has a historic photo of the band. That's appropriate since the text addresses their history a little bit, though mainly it stresses that they continue to grow and move with the times. For example, we're told, No dinosaur, no living legend, the Beach Boys remain a vital force in the arena. They have brought politics and philosophy to concerts and vice versa. And as a musical endeavor, they're still evolving, changing, growing. Brian, they tell us, now concentrates his energy in the recording studio and on his writing. It's really not far removed from something Jack Riley would have written for them. As 1975 draws to a close, it's been nearly 3 years since there was a new Beach Boys studio album. Based on the way they're presenting themselves in their 1975 tour book, I'm sure I would have assumed that when we finally did get new music, it would be new, modern, progressive sounds adapting to the times as they always had. And now let's begin wrapping things up with a look at the final album chart of the year, December 27th, 1975. Chicago 9, Chicago's Greatest Hits, is one of the big holiday releases for the year. In fact, this is one that I got for Christmas in 1975. It's in the third of an eventual 5 weeks at number 1. At number 2 is Gratitude by Earth, Wind & Fire. It'll spend 3 weeks at number 1, beginning January 17th. Another big best of for the holidays, History, America's Greatest Hits, is in the second of an eventual 6 weeks at number 3. KC and the Sunshine Band's self-titled album is in the second of 2 weeks at its number 4 peak. Hissing of Summer Lawns by Joni Mitchell is at number 5. It'll go to number 4 for 3 weeks, beginning next week, January 3rd. Paul Simon's Still Crazy After All These Years is at number 6. It had been number 1 the week of December 6th. The next 3 albums were all in the top 10 at the beginning of the quarter. We talked about them then. At number 7 is John Denver's Wind Song. Red Octopus by Jefferson Starship is at number 8. At number 9 is Honey by the Ohio Players. And rounding out the top 10, another holiday best of, Helen Reddy's Greatest Hits. It'll spend 3 weeks at number 5, beginning January 17th. The end of 1975 represents the beginning of a rough and unofficial end to a very odd period on the album chart with a lot of turnover. From the time the Billboard album chart started in 1955 until 1973, there had never been more than 12 number 1 albums in a single year. Before 1972, there were often blockbuster albums, many of them soundtracks, that would top the chart for 12 weeks or more. The West Side Story soundtrack had the longest run, a total of 54 weeks. There were 12 number 1 albums in 1972, 17 in 1973, 23 in 1974, and 19 in 1975. Of course, those albums would often only be number 1 for a week or two. Between the beginning of 1973 and the end of 1975, only Elton John's Greatest Hits at the end of 1974 hit the 10-week mark. Beginning in 1976, the album chart will begin to return to the more familiar pattern with more blockbusters and fewer number 1 albums. It'll continue that way until roughly the mid-90s. Of course, more about that when we get to 1976. The same thing is roughly true for the singles chart as well. Since the beginning of the Hot 100 in 1955, there had usually been around 20 number 1 hits per year, with the most being 27 in 1966. 1973 tied that record with 27. Then 1974 and 1975 both had 35 number 1 hits. After this, it'll largely revert to that earlier pattern of about 20 a year until the early 90s. In another example of the kind of churn we have on the charts during this period, all but 2 of the singles in the top 10 at year end either have been or will be number 1. And let's look at that final singles chart of the year. Let's Do It Again, the title song from the film by the Staple Singers, is at number 1. Saturday Night by the Bay City Rollers is at number 2. It'll hit number 1 next week, January 3rd, 1976. That's the Way I Like It by KC and the Sunshine Band is at number 3. It had been number 1 a week earlier on December 20th. Love Roller Coaster, Say What, by the Ohio Players is at number 4. It'll go to number 1 on January 31st. The theme from Mahogany, Do You Know Oh, where you going to? By Diana Ross is at number 5. It'll go to number 1 on January 24th. I Write the Songs by Barry Manilow is at number 6. It'll hit number 1 on January 17th. I have no doubt that everybody watching this channel knows that I Write the Songs was written by former Beach Boy Bruce Johnston and not by Barry Manilow, but it'll be the cause of unending confusion for the general public. A surprising amount of Manilow's early publicity presented him as a successful and prolific songwriter. Much of it centered around his early career as a writer of familiar ad jingles like those for McDonald's, Pepsi, and Band-Aid. He did write or co-write many of the songs on his albums, some of which became hit singles, but it wasn't at all unusual for him to record songs written by others. Of his 15 top 40 hits of the 70s, Manilow co-wrote 6. Of his 11 career top 10 hits, he has a co-writing credit on 3. Could It Be Magic, Copacabana, and is one of 4 lyricists on I Made It Through the Rain in 1980. Getting back to hit singles, at number 7 is Convoy by C.W. McCall. CB radio has been growing in popularity for several years. Mainly, it's been used by long-distance truckers to communicate with each other on the highway. Increasingly, the general public is buying them to monitor local traffic conditions and communicate in case of emergency. Especially in rural areas, people keep them in their homes as well as in their cars as a backup if phone lines go down during bad weather. Convoy really brings the craze into focus. All the jargon like, break 1-9 good buddy, put the hammer down, and catch you on the flip-flop sounds really cool, and everybody wants to create their own handle for the CB. We had one in the farmhouse when I was a teenager for possible use in an emergency. The highway was just visible from our house, so if we saw traffic was backed up, we'd turn it on to try to find out what was going on. Like most people, I suspect, we soon discovered that we really had very little to say on a CB and began switching it on less and less. The single will hit number 1 on January 10th. Sweet is back with another U.S. hit in 1975, following up on Ballroom Blitz. Fox on the Run is currently at number 8. It'll peak at number 5 on January 17th. Fly Robin Fly by Silver Convention is at number 9. It had been number 1 for 3 weeks, beginning November 29th. And at number 10 is I Love Music, Part 1 by the OJs. It'll spend 2 weeks at number 5, beginning January 24th. On December 31st, for the 4th year, you could ring in the new year on ABC with Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. This year's host is Neil Sedaka with guests, the Average White Band, Freddie Fender, KC and the Sunshine Band, and Melissa Manchester at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles. As usual, Dick Clark covers the action in Times Square. And that, of course, brings us to the end of 1975. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your feedback. We will eventually resume with 1976 and the Beach Boys' first studio album in more than 3 years. Next time, we'll move on to other times and other topics. Thanks for watching. Please hit like if you don't mind, subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Bye.